It's the summer of 1985, which in Moscow is still actually kind of cold. Alexei Pajitnov, a low-level programmer, is sitting around. He puts together Tetris. It's the most simple puzzle game you can think of, stacking blocks, but there's something magical about it.
So, you know, he can't sell the game. This is communist Russia after all. So instead, he gives it away to his friends. And then, you know, it's spread all through Moscow.
You copied it for your friend, he copied it for his friend, he copied it for his friend, and soon it had spread all the way to the outer states. That's what communism is. It means free Tetris.
Now, the game eventually ends up in Hungary, in Budapest, at a trade show. Some Hungarian guys had made like an Apple version of it. And this guy, Robert Stein, comes in. He's like an opportunist who travels around trying to buy up stuff cheap and sell it more expensively somewhere else, and he sees the game. He says, this game is great. I'm not even gonna buy this game. I'm just gonna steal it.
In Stein's defense, you know, what do? How do you break through that red curtain and get the rights to this game? Russia's a society, and they don't even have private property, much less an abstract concept like intellectual property. How do you deal with that? You know, and it was probably easier to just steal it.
So Stein takes the game back to the West and starts selling the rights to all these other companies. Because they don't know any better. They think that he actually legitimately got the rights from the guy who created the game back in Russia. Now, people don't really remember Robert Maxwell these days, but back in the 80s, he was a huge media mogul. He was like Rupert Murdoch. So then Stein sells it to Robert Maxwell's video game company called Microsoft.
Basically just creating fake contracts, fake deals with all sorts of companies, from Microsoft to Atari in the States to Spectrum Holobyte. Basically went around selling it, just trying to make as much cash as he could before the Soviets figured out he was selling their property.
There's just this whole mess because Robert Stein's selling rights, the people he's selling rights to are selling their rights, and they're not real. But there's just this whole web of deceit and just laziness that no one's checking up on it, and it's just gonna come crashing down on them.
Before anyone had officially ironed out who owned the rights, Tetris had already become the best-selling PC game in the UK and in America.
Robert Stein probably thought it was never gonna be a big deal, you know? He just thought he'd sell a few 100,000 copies at best, make a quick buck. No one in communist Russia's ever gonna find out about this. But the thing is, Tetris is really good. It's really good, and it just becomes a worldwide phenomenon.
So the game gets so big that the Russian government actually takes notice. Now, mind you, Russia at this time is communist, so there's no owner in particular other than Mother Russia.
The Russians are communists, but they're not stupid. They see what's going on. And they create Elorg, this company to manage the rights for Tetris. Before, there was never really anyone to officially manage the rights. Now that that organization exists, there's just this rampant land grab.
You've got Maxwell, you've got Stein, and you've got Nintendo, who are about to launch their Game Boy, all coming into Moscow at the same time, trying to snap up as many of the rights as they can for different platforms for this game.
And there's a lot of sticky issues here. This is a society that works in just a completely different way, so it wasn't exactly clear how it was going to shake out.
Now, Nintendo, they took the red eye, they got there first. They meet up with the Russian officials, and they say, hey, we'd love to get the rights for this kind of handheld version we're going to do, and we'll show you what a good job we did. We made a Nintendo cartridge. Here, check it out.
Pulled out a cartridge. The Russians freaked. They're like, we've never been paid for this. We didn't even know this existed.
And the Russians go, where did that come from? We didn't give you the rights to that. Oh, we bought the rights. No, you didn't. So the Nintendo guy says, listen, I'll tell you what. I'll just write you a check right now for these rights too, okay? We sold a bunch of these cartridges. Here's the royalties. Just take this.
The Russians, who hadn't been paid at all for any of the versions that were bestsellers in the West, took that check and said, finally, someone's actually taking care of us. And they immediately granted the rights to Nintendo.
Now the Stein guy, he's been selling this game left and right. It's the #1 best-selling computer game out there, and of course he hasn't paid the Russians a cent. So the Russian government is furious. But instead of giving Stein the old poison-tip umbrella in the middle of Trafalgar Square, they say, hey, let's at least get some of this money. So they signed a contract with him to sell the computer version of the game.
Now, Stein thinks he's buying the rights for computers, and he's thinking about the broad definition of computers. He thinks he's gonna sell it on calculators, on Game Boy, on watches, Nintendos. I mean, things to come in the future, everything.
So he figured nobody can say what is and what isn't a computer, so I pretty much have everything that I need to make money off of this.
And the Russians realize this. So in the 11th hour, they snuck something into the contract where they defined a computer as something with a keyboard and a monitor.
That one little sentence basically blocks Stein from making money on any other distribution of Tetris, which means he collects nothing from the Game Boy, he collects nothing from any arcade rights, he collects nothing from any home console rights. He got the rights to anything that has a monitor and keyboard, which is basically at this point a PC. And you know what? Tetris was already a huge success on the PC, so it's over. So now Stein is stuck with nothing.
Now Maxwell shows up later in the day. By the time he gets there, all the good stuff is already gone. It's like he was on the Russian bread line. He gets to the front, there's no bread left.
And so we all know what happens. Russia sells the rights to handhelds and consoles to none other than Nintendo. And we know how that story ends.
After all the dust settles, Nintendo releases the Game Boy with Tetris. And Tetris helps the Game Boy go on to become a bestseller, and the Game Boy helps Tetris to become the best-selling game of all time, with like 30 million Game Boy versions of that alone out on the marketplace.
If someone got screwed and maybe didn't deserve it under their, other banner, Tengen, I think Atari got unfairly screwed in the whole Tetris debacle.
Atari had bought these imaginary rights to the game, and they thought they were buying something real, but they weren't. And they produced and advertised their version of Tetris, which a lot of people think is superior.
I mean, Atari had actually made so many of these cartridges, they couldn't just throw them all away. They actually had to put them out in the marketplace first, just to kind of roll the dice. And then when they lost the case, they had to recall them all, and that ended up costing them even more in the long run.
And at this point, there's a lot of bad blood between Atari and Nintendo, so Nintendo's only too happy to stop Atari from selling what they thought was going to be a hit game.
And of course, back in Russia, the Russian government made millions off of this, but Alexei Pajitnov, the programmer, didn't make any money at all because, of course, Communist Party system can't really make a lot of money.
If Pajitnov would have been born in a totally different country, the whole crazy, twisted story about all these companies fighting for all the rights, wouldn't even exist.
It's kind of interesting, actually. Tetris has probably appeared on more operating systems, consoles, handheld video games, graphing calculators, and probably any other game in history.
The reason why Tetris is the #1 selling game of all time is because it's not technology dependent. You could put that game anywhere, and it plays just as good as anywhere else. You could put that game on a cell phone, and it's going to play just as good as it's going to play on an Xbox 360. Basically, it's the solitaire of the next millennium.
That's why Tetris got so popular, and why Tetris spread so fast. Just wherever you play it, it's the same feeling.
In 100 years from now, Tetris will still be here. Just like solitaire, just like chess, and all these new games, they'll be nowhere to be found.
Yeah, Tetris is going to be around forever. It's going to outlive us all.